Speaking of our panel, let's bring them in early. Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief of The Federalist, syndicated radio host Hugh Hewitt, and Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist. I want to start with the Supreme Court ruling. Hugh, significant, this gun ruling today. The impact nationwide?
Well, there are 6 other states, Brett, that have the same sort of regime about issuing permits that New York State does, a regime that was struck down as unconstitutional under the plain language of the Second Amendment today. Justice Alito, he wrote a concurring opinion. 6 justices agreed, and Justice Thomas wrote the majority opinion. But Justice Alito said, look, what we're deciding today is very simply put, Americans have the right to go out of their house and carry their weapon in self-defense. They don't have to beg a bureaucrat to get that permit, and 43 states already agree with that. The 7 states who have ask and we may give you the permit regimes, their laws are unconstitutional. No one should be surprised by this. It's been 10 years coming and being made explicit, but it's not a surprise.
President Biden's statement on this, he said more than a century later, the United States Supreme Court has chosen to strike down New York's long-established authority to protect its citizens. This ruling contradicts both common sense and the Constitution and should deeply trouble us all, Leslie. It seems like he's advocating for a major pushback from states.
Well, it's going to be very interesting when we have the abortion ruling come down, Brett, because this court can't say, and I guess they can technically, that is the state's responsibility to make these decisions when you have basically this ruling today saying that it isn't. And then we also have to look to the Constitution. Much like the Bible, you can't just take a verse or a paragraph. It takes it out of context. When you look at Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 15 and 16, it specifically gives Congress, that is the federal government, the right to regulate, the right to arm, the right to discipline that militia, which would be everybody in or outside of their home carrying a weapon. And then lastly, although this doesn't apply to New York, it does apply to half of the states in the United States that have these conceal and carry permits, because you don't need a background check, you don't need any kind of training, you don't need any kind of clearance. And then there are people like me and my kids who say, well, what about our rights that we feel are being infringed upon when we don't know that all of these people concealing and carrying are responsible gun owners?
Yeah. Molly, National Review writes it this way: the coming contradiction on judicial activism. Many progressives seem psychologically incapable of recognizing that the way gun control advocates feel about today's decision and the Heller decision is exactly the way pro-lifers feel about Roe v. Wade. It's not merely that they oppose the decision, it's that they believe the Supreme Court stepped into a role it was never meant to have, overruling the duly elected legislature based upon a hotly contested interpretation of the Constitution. That's what it comes down to. Are these 2 different cases? We don't have the Roe v. Wade decision yet.
Well, the fundamental difference is that the Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms, whereas abortion was an invented right that was invented in 1973 and has no basis in the Constitution. And so what this ruling said today is that the Second Amendment that gun rights cannot be treated as second-class rights by our government. But it also speaks to a larger issue going on with the court. We had for decades had a court that viewed itself as a legislative body. If they wanted abortion to be legal, they voted it in against the will of the people. And this court that we have a strong majority on, thanks to 3 Trump appointees, is one that says it's not really mattering what our personal views are. What matters is what the Constitution says and what is legal and constitutional. And so you're seeing that reflected in all sorts of decisions going forward.
Also today, the January 6th committee, this dealt with the former President Trump, president at the time, trying to pressure DOJ officials to say that the election in 2020 was corrupt. Here is Richard Donahue about that.
The December 27th conversation was, in my mind, an escalation of the earlier conversations. The president's entreaties became more urgent. He became more adamant that we weren't doing our job. I felt in that conversation that it was incumbent on me to make it very clear to the president what our investigations had revealed, and that we had concluded, based on actual investigations, actual witness interviews, actual reviews of documents, that these allegations simply had no merit.
Hugh, what do you make of this hearing today and overall how these have kind of come out methodically?
Well, today I learned something new, and that's unusual. I learned that the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel, Steve Engel, I've only met once and had a long conversation with once, but he's very highly esteemed in Washington, D.C., and he served in that job 4 years for President Trump. When asked by President Trump what he would do if he fired the acting attorney general and replaced him with a Trump loyalist further down, he said, "I'll quit." And the president backed off. That's news. That's the first time I've learned something from these hearings. And so the reason the public is fundamentally disinterested in what is going on in the Nancy Pelosi 1-6 committee is that there is precious little news in these hearings. But when there is some, I notice it, and I note that the president got pushback from one of his most trusted aides, and we ought to know that.
Well, and just the laying out of the narrative, obviously, Leslie tells a story that some people didn't follow all the way along. I do want to mention this. New York Times writes it this way. Federal authorities search home of Trump Justice Department official. Investigators descended on the home of Jeffrey Clark, former Justice Department official, on Wednesday in connection with the department's sprawling inquiry into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It remained unclear exactly what the investigators may have been looking for. Clark came up, obviously, numerous times today in the hearing, Leslie. But it's interesting. It's 536 days after the discussion about possibly putting him in as the acting attorney general to change the dynamics at DOJ. It seems like a long time.
Well, if you read the people on my Twitter feed, Brett, they've been asking for this for over 500 days now. So they would agree with you. My side, the lefties and the Democrats certainly would agree with you on that. But I would disagree with something that my friend Hugh just said. Polls today show that over 60%, 6 in 10 Americans are watching this. Over 60% of Americans feel that this was planned. And this is the reason it needs to be out there, not for politics or votes in the midterms, but for the American people, regardless of their party, to know exactly how close things came and what was done to try and dismiss the vote and the will in a free and fair election of the American people in the United States of America. And that is not only educational, it's dangerous.
Molly, last word.
Yes, so one of the problems with having a show trial, which is what this is that you only get one side. I wrote a book on the 2020 election. I interviewed people on both sides of this dispute, and I actually respect people on both sides of this dispute. What you had at the Department of Justice was different ideas about how to pursue what was a very problematic election. And most people just thought it was there wasn't enough there to go with. But some people really did think that there was enough to go there, and that's what Jeffrey Clark was doing. And President Trump does have the right to decide who will be in charge of the Department of Justice, so nothing illegal with that either. I am much more concerned by the Department of Justice raiding this man's house in a pre-dawn raid, seemingly in conjunction with this show trial, where we have had no minority rights, no Republican-appointed members, no chance to have a balance of conversation. And there really is a balance, and I know because I wrote the book on it.
All right, panel, thank you. We'll talk to you a little bit later in the show. Border issues, and we're talking about fentanyl as well, coming across, as well as illegal immigrants. So many, it's about the size of Austin, Texas, the population. May, the apprehension numbers, 239,416 encounters, 100,000 expelled via Title 42, 14,699 unaccompanied minors at the border in May. Where are we on this issue? We're back with our panel, Molly Hemingway, Hugh Hewitt, and Leslie Marshall. Molly, it's not going away, it's only increasing, and the administration is not really talking about it at all.
They're not talking about it, but some of those previous speakers were right. President Biden, when he was running for election, said that he thought the previous administration's border policy was cruel. He did say that he wanted people to cross the border, and they are in record numbers. But it really is cruel to have such a policy. We have a human rights catastrophe. The cartels are managing the process. They are not good people to be dealing with. We have fentanyl crossing the border, which is destroying so many people's lives. And it is also a national security threat. You know, some of the terrorists, suspected terrorists, are caught crossing, but not all. And it is a complete disaster. It is notable how calm people seem to be about it relative to the concern they had, again, just a few years ago.
Leslie, do you think that this is a big political issue for your party?
Absolutely. It's second or third, depending on who you ask and in what state, especially border states or portions of states like mine, people in San Diego versus people in Sacramento, as an example. You know, but here's the problem, and I've said it a million times, and this is something both Democrats and Republicans, presidents, Senate, House, kick the can down the road. Because, you know, when you can say bad, 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 look at the numbers, no matter who's in office, Democrat or Republican, there is political gain and benefit for that other party. And that's shameful, because honestly, all you have to do is have Congress do their job and to change the asylum laws. They come here seeking asylum because they have to come here to seek asylum. And I agree with some of what Molly said with regard to fentanyl. You know, we know there's a connection between China and the Mexican cartels, and we need to look at what we can do about that. And speaking of what we can do about that, there is something with the administration right now they're trying to put forth with regard to health care that could save over 160,000 lives, because so many are lost with fentanyl addiction. There's a Senate Oversight Committee that is looking at that right now.
I mean, there may be, Leslie, but Hugh, I don't hear anything from the administration about fentanyl, and those numbers are through the roof.
It's a tomb, and the fentanyl that all of us agree is the #1 part of the border crisis is what we have to be focused on. It killed 107,000 Americans last year. It is a wide open border. I know you wanted to talk about the FDA and Juul. And I have to say, why are we focusing part of the federal government, the FDA, on regulating Juul when we can't regulate the border? Why do we assume the federal government can do anything when it can't do the first thing, which is to control the border? As Molly said, the cartels control the border, not the administration. So why would we trust the FDA, which had a very bad year anyway in the course of COVID? They blew the Johnson & Johnson pause. They blew a lot of the Abbott laboratory process. They do not have a great reputation right now, and they're shutting down Juul. I'm not a fan of Juul. Why in the world would we trust them when the government can't do anything on its #1 job?
Well, that's, I mean, a good question. New York Times, Molly, while the tobacco industry was one of the most heavily regulated in the country, the e-cigarette market was like the Wild West, with no rules dictating how the industry could advertise or to whom it could sell its products. The use of e-cigarettes exploded, and Juul quickly swallowed up more than 50% of the market. But the FDA is saying no more to Juul. But as we mentioned, the administration not speaking very loudly about fentanyl, which there's just fentanyl just a little bit, about the size of covering the date on a penny, could kill you.
Yeah, this is not an administration that has been making policies based on a genuine reading of science or medicine. We've seen that in how they've handled issues such as, you know, the so-called sex change surgeries for minors or vaccine mandates. They're giving out crack pipes, for crying out loud, and they're not caring about the fentanyl crisis. You know, these vaping products were used by a lot of people to quit smoking, and it is not clear, you know, just why they're doing this authoritarian power grab.
All right, panel, thank you so much.